I think that is the biggest mistake that I see teams run into, or their biggest miss, where they end up focusing on increasing the conversion rate of a website instead of actually increasing activation rates or moments of value.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Forget the Funnel podcast. We're Gia and Claire, founders of Forget the Funnel, a product marketing and growth consultancy that helps SaaS businesses learn from their best customers, map and measure their experiences, and unlock their best levers for growth. If you're looking to help your team make smarter decisions, this show is for you. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Forget the Funnel podcast. Today, we have another one of our best practice episodes where we invite experts from the SaaS world to share a common best practice that they actually think is totally broken. Then Gia and I will share our take on what we think you should do instead. Today, we are joined by Marc Thomas, Senior Growth Marketer at Podia. Marc is joining us today to share his thoughts on A/B testing. So here those are.
What's up? My name's Marc Thomas. I work in growth at Podia. What's a flawed best practice in SaaS? I think that a flawed best practice in SaaS that we do all the time, that everyone's default answer is to say, let's test it. The reality is A/B testing is challenging and it doesn't always produce the results that you think that it's going to. And it can often lead you to misleading stuff. What makes it flawed? A/B testing has a number of different flaws. The first thing is you can only optimize what's on your page or your product. If you've got 100 people coming onto your product, let's say you've got 100 signups and you've got those people coming onto your product and you're trying to get them to convert to, paid signups. You can only optimize those 100 people, and yet you spend a huge amount of time trying to optimize for those. And even if it's 100,000, is a 1% difference really going to drive the needle for your actual growth in your company? It's just statistical, right? There is even if you do this over and over and over and over again, those are not just going to compile 1% additional, 1% additional, 1%. You're not going to get to 100% conversion just by trying to A/B test your way to it. The other thing is you're basically doing something so inhuman by trying to A/B test your way to success. You know what it's like? It's like when, let's say you've got a piece of cheese and you put that cheese onto a table, and then you go, here are all of the obstacles for this mouse that I've just put down. Honestly, A/B testing, it's more like a rat, and the rat is the user. And now you've got to try and work out, okay, what's the optimal way that I can get this rat to that cheese so that it can have it? The whole thing is trying to optimize a maze, right? You're trying to do the same thing for your users. You're trying to take walls out of the way or put them in different places or move all of the walls so that they just go straight to the cheese. The reality is you could just take the cheese to the rat, right? It can be nice. It can be pleasant and human. You don't have to build a maze. You don't have to try and optimize somebody's behavior and take all of their kind of ability to think and evaluate away from them in order to get them to the goal, which is to solve their problem and, while doing it, pay you so that you can solve your problems. Why do you think these people get swept up following this best practice? Firstly, I think there are loads and loads of reasons, but here is the killer one for me. Firstly, I just think it really is a way of saying shut up in a marketing meeting. Almost all the time that somebody says, oh, I don't know, let's test it, it's because they're saying, I don't actually think your idea will work, but let's get some data just in case I could be wrong, and so that you shut up. That's the common one. Look, the real thing is, if we knew what worked, we would just do that thing, right? Now, not knowing what our users want and how they feel and how they think is the key driver for trying to optimize 100 visitors. It's trying to optimize that rat maze. The key driver is I don't actually know what my customers think and how they feel. And so I've got to try and statistically drive them to take an action that I want them to take rather than the action that they actually want to take or the way that they want to think about it. That's honestly the key reason is people just don't know how their customers feel and think. Let's think of the best that we can of this. Let's think that people probably aren't just trying to kind of shut everyone up or just purely rely on, with the things they don't know. There is this angle, obviously, which is people really struggle to talk to other people. They struggle to ask them questions about their lives. The concept of doing customer research for a lot of people and gaining customer insight is actually really challenging. Maybe they're not wired that way, or maybe they feel uncomfortable with it. And so they lean back on what they can, which is, we've got cold hard numbers here and we've got them up the wazoo. Like, if you have a SaaS company and you're building a product, like, you've got numbers coming out of your years. So look, why don't we just use the things that we already know? And we engineer this kind of, this rat maze so that it's perfect. And that's like perfectly understandable, but ultimately perfectly pointless. This is not gonna get you the growth that you actually want. What should they be doing instead? Well, I guess this is pretty simple. It's simple and really hard at the same time. Okay. The simple bit of this is, you should be trying to get closer to your customers and trying to understand what it is that drives them. Why did they sign up for this product? Or why did they even come and look at this landing page if it's prior to the sign up process? What is it that they're trying to do in their day? Why have they not chosen other tools? This kind of thing, right? Now, that's a really simple kind of understanding. Getting that understanding is really challenging sometimes. What I've seen in my own work is that it usually doesn't come from just one source. It doesn't just come from, hey, I've done 10 customer interviews. Like, great if you've done that. Congratulations, you should be doing that. But maybe you also factor in some survey data. Maybe you survey, X number of people. Maybe you watch screen recordings of what they do on not just your app, but also your landing pages. Like, what are they doing there? What are they interested in? What are they not interested in? What kinds of things are they saying on social media? All that kind of social listening stuff. What are review sites saying? Some of that data is going to be like more relevant than other data, but all of that together will start to give you a picture of what your customer actually feels. Now, you can combine that with stuff that is very clear, very obvious. So sales tapes, self-reported attribution, when they say, oh, I signed up to do this. All of this data goes together to build an understanding of your customers. Now, what do you do with that thing? Right? How do you actually apply this so that it replaces A/B testing? Again, simple but complex, right? The simple bit of it is that you create, from those insights, novel campaigns, messaging that actually responds to these people. You show off bits of the product in illustrations on your landing pages that actually apply to what they're trying to do. The reality is, the complicated bit is still quite complicated, right? Which is, you will miss sometimes. But my argument is, by getting away from this like statistical model of trying to optimize a page to, okay, we know about our users, therefore we can build bigger, better tests that really, take bolder swings and aim for hitting our customers directly in the feelings, or the emotional element of actually trying to get somebody to go, well, this product works for me because it has these features and they clearly understand me better than anyone else on the market. The kinds of things that you're going to create after that are much more effective than simply saying, well, if we change the layout of this section and we change that button color, we'll get our rats to the cheese in a much more efficient way.
Okay. Love Marc. Love that answer. Surprise, surprise, we agree. But I think probably to sort of set the stage of the conversation, we probably need to talk a little bit about what is A/B testing, and just get clear on the thing that we're talking about here is split testing or A/B testing, which is essentially this idea that you split traffic or audiences, because sometimes, it'll happen on the product side as well as it does for websites, but traffic, so to speak, people, you will split people, their experiences to two different experiences. In general, we're talking about an A/B test where you do a 50-50 split of traffic. When I was in-house at Unbounce, we talked about split testing a lot. It was, a huge driver of sort of value for our customers, was this idea that you could test, your messaging or layout or color or button color or headlines or images or videos, test everything was our mantra. Sometimes we would advocate for a 50-50 split test. Other times when people were feeling cautious, we would say, use your sort of control and send about 80% of your traffic to your control. And then your variant, start with 20%, or if you're feeling really risk averse, 10%. But in general, when we're talking about split testing, most people are describing a 50-50 split, but obviously other, percentages definitely exist depending on your situation. So that when we're talking about split testing or A/B testing, That is what we're talking about. We're not talking about UX testing or usability testing. That's not the situation here at all. We're really just zoomed in on this idea that like, if you don't know the answer to something, test it, split test it.
Yeah, good foundation. I'm hoping you can like talk us through some situations. So like when might teams lean on A/B testing? What are scenarios? Because I know there was like you were having a conversation with the CTO like just last week about how do we test it? When do we test it?
Exactly. There are a lot of scenarios where a team might lean on A/B testing as the sort of answer to like, I don't know what to do in this certain situation. One of the scenarios is definitely the one that Marc described, where it's like a head of marketing gets an idea from their boss. Their boss is like, we should add a calculator to our homepage. And that head of marketing or whoever's responsible for the website is like, that is a terrible idea. And I'm going to prove to this person or to my boss that that is a terrible idea. Or it's, leadership on an adjacent team, or, because everybody is marketed to. So we all think we're experts at marketing. It's hard to be a head of marketing, especially in MarTech, but don't get me started on that. But you may end up in this situation where you're like, I'm getting all these ideas, people who are stakeholders in my work really like have these ideas, and I need to show them that like, A, I care about their opinion, but also B, it's probably a bad idea. And so I'm going to prove to them that it's a bad idea. And so we'll test it. And if they really want to test it, then like we're going to see. Another situation, which I see happen a lot too, is where teams are like really nervous or really risk averse for a number of reasons. And so they're like, we need to test everything because we need the data. So they're in a situation where, and I see this happen with product teams a lot, where they're like, we cannot take too big of swings. Like we need to make very calculated decisions because the implications are so big. And so they need, in order to get buy-in on their ideas, they run split tests to basically like validate their hypotheses, and they sort of run in hypothesis mode. And then there's this other situation, which is the one that you are speaking about, which is the conversation that I was in last week with the leadership team, that we have just come out of the research and learning about their customers. And we have like all this amazing intel on this really high value group of customers. And the CTO was like, okay, but how do we test this? Like, we're not just going to overhaul everything, right? Like we're going to test this, right? And to which my answer was like, yes, absolutely. This should be tested. But just remember that when you're testing, let's say new messaging for a better fit customer for your product, I often have to caution teams against measuring success as being the conversion rate on their website, because arguably the conversion rate on your website could go down, but if that's generating more revenue for the business, it's still a win. So just because your homepage is converting more, your pricing page on your website is converting more, does not mean that the downstream impact of that is more revenue. And I know that we have an example to talk about that's related to that. So this sort of being a little bit cautious, I see this with teams that have been around for longer, right? They're like, well, our website has always been for this customer. We're not just going to all of a sudden, completely make this shift. It can be scary to make that big of a shift in messaging sometimes when you come out of a research project where you're like, oh, we've been targeting the wrong customer this whole time. Teams can still feel concerned about like, I know I saw the research, but could we split test, our homepage basically with like an 80-20 split or even a 90-10 split?
Right. Give us some kind of indicator that this is going to be effective before I think like in our notes, when we were prepping, we talked about like, before we bet the farm, like, can we get some kind of indicator that this is a good idea?
Exactly. I want to make clear that we're not saying that teams shouldn't do that. We absolutely should in that scenario. But there are some situations where, like the first example, like trying to prove that an idea is bad or trying to prove that an idea is good, in the absence of customer understanding, which is what Marc, was talking about. That is where A/B testing can go off the rails, when you just sort of like, you're running tests for test's sake and you're not actually going to be moving the needle in a meaningful way. That is not the scenario that we're describing with this team that is shifting their messaging in a pretty dramatic way. In that situation, I would say A/B testing is absolutely valid and should happen.
This is a nice segue into like the next part of this topic we were going to discuss, which is like the challenges or the limitations associated with A/B testing everything. We are not anti-A/B testing. We are not anti-testing in general. But there's a very big difference between like testing for testing's sake or testing in absence of customer insight versus learning some of the key things you need to know about your customer base and then running tests based on what you have learned. And I think the version of A/B testing or the best practice of A/B testing that Marc is calling out is that idea of testing in isolation. There was one line in what Marc said about like getting out of the like statistical mindset that really, really resonated with me. Because when a team is running A/B test after A/B test after A/B test, there is more of this focus on like we need the statistics to prove that this exercise was valuable versus a scenario of gathering customer insight that helps you form hypotheses that are strong enough that enable you to take bigger swings that can be more impactful on like on the revenue numbers, but may not give you the sexiest looking statistically significant results.
Yes, to your point, we can end up chasing our tail a little bit and chasing small, tiny little incremental wins because we're focused on like the individual trees as opposed to the forest. So definitely getting a clearer picture and a better understanding of who your ideal customers are, even if that means a drop in your website conversion rate, if it ultimately turns into higher activation rates, higher engagement rates, higher ACV or higher LTV, that is a win. And I think that is the biggest mistake that I see teams sort of run into, or their biggest miss, where they end up focusing on increasing the conversion rate of a website instead of actually increasing activation rates or moments of value, like customers hitting moments of value. So that is actually what I told this CTO, was like, yes, you should absolutely test this. And I just want to make sure that your measure of success, and everybody in the room understands that the measure of success is actual activation rates, not your website's conversion rate, because so many teams go wrong there. And it means a longer test, right? It might mean, depending on how quickly your customers hit first value. And we can talk a little bit about like what that right moment of like, how would you measure a win, right? Like, how does a team measure the success of like new messaging and positioning on their website genuinely? If it's not the website conversion rate, well, then what is it? We can maybe talk a little bit about that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, is it turning into more customers? That is what determines your winner of your test.
I would love to dig into, an example of A/B testing leading to a problematic or misleading result. And I know there's a company we've been working with that has been struggling with this. Maybe you can paint the picture, because I know you had the original conversation with them, but they had a very successful pricing and packaging test that ultimately on the revenue side has been like pretty bad news.
Ultimately, what it ended up turning into was a shift in their pricing strategy, which often shifts in pricing strategies are determined. I mean, they're determined in many ways, but one of the ways is like the actual economic, like let's do the math on how this would impact things. But also people make decisions about pricing strategies and pricing and packaging based on testing it on pricing pages. That's one of the inputs to determining one pricing strategy over another, is by rolling it out on your website and putting it on your pricing page and seeing how it performs. And so this team, again, I don't know all the details of how this test was run, but ultimately this team made a decision to move to usage-based pricing. Like the test won, right? So and this is not going to surprise anybody listening to this, that the test won. Usage-based pricing can be really, really attractive. And what we have found since learning, we're in the middle of this like engagement with this client. So we haven't gone all the way through this, but this was just such a big learning. What we found was in the research that there were actually two pretty distinct groups of customers showing up. One, that usage-based pricing was really, really attractive to, made this tool like a no-brainer for, because they were looking at this tool a little bit like a commodity, a little bit like a bolt-on to what they were doing. And they wanted to be able to make a decision quickly, implement quickly, and move on, because they were seeing this tool as being, again, like a bolt-on, a bit of a commodity. So usage-based pricing for them was like, yep, it's got to be. And what we realized was there was this other group of customers also showing up, and they were looking at this tool, more like a solution, more like a platform, more like a growth lever. And for them, the usage-based pricing was actually almost worrisome because they were like, oh, I should be thinking about this as a commoditized tool. The lens through which I should be looking at this solution is actually as like, smaller, lower impact, again, not to use that term again, but like more commoditized. And so these more serious businesses that were looking at this as like, this is a real investment we're making as a business. This could be a huge growth lever for us. And this is a strategic business decision that we're making. Usage-based pricing or only, usage-based pricing, our hypothesis is that it might be causing a little bit of anxiety in that way higher value, better quality, higher quality, better product fit, add in all the like qualifiers here, customer. And so we have these two customers have surfaced in the research, and it is not a surprise that if you were basing the sort of winner of this test on conversion rates on the website, well, yeah, of course you would go with usage-based pricing if that was one of your inputs to determining a winner. And by the way, I don't want to pretend for a moment that this team made this decision solely based on an A/B test. They didn't, but it was one of the inputs to determining the winner, which has led them down this path of realizing, oh shit, this test basically attracted us a poorer fit customer and it's dropped ACV across the board. So anyways, now we're in a situation where we know so much more about these amazing customers and we can make way more informed decisions about what pricing and packaging is going to work a lot better for them. Okay, so let's talk about like, okay, what does good look like and what's the flip side of this? What is required in order to get to a place where A/B testing actually is going to be a lot more meaningful? Can you talk us through that?
Okay, I'm gonna use two like good and bads, and they're going to sound so silly, but if you're listening, try to apply them to your own scenario because they're real. I'm just packaging them up for this conversation. So good example of running a test on a website or as part of a sign-up form. Research showed our customers care about X, and so we are going to test a call to action that is more aligned with X or that promises X. A bad example, our marketing advisor said we need to have a lead magnet, and so we're testing having a lead magnet.
And that's a real quote.
That sounds I know that's so silly, but that is an actual conversation I had with a CEO who he's an intelligent person. He's a subject matter expert on the industry that his product serves, but he's not a go-to-market expert. And so he's getting this advice and he's like, sounds like it makes sense to me. And I think that really paints the picture of how good of an antidote A/B testing can feel like. But it's just when it's just a best practice and it's not rooted in something about your specific customer, it's usually more of a waste of time or chasing your tail exercise than it is really that productive. Let's go back to the conversation actually that you were having with this leadership team, including that CTO. What did the research look like that led you to that point?
I think the difference maker there, like the mental shift that the team was able to make, again, after, I can't remember what the exact number was. I want to say maybe it was 11 interviews were run, and we identified 3 different jobs to be done among these 11 customers, which was really, really interesting. The insights that we brought back to the team were both validating for the team. Like they were like, yep, we've heard this before. Yep, this makes sense. But also the differences between these 3 groups, that was the mindset shift for them because they sort of conflated all of these jobs to be done in all of their customers. And so they were solving for all of those things all at the same time because they were thinking of their customers as being this like group of people that just had all of these challenges and had all of these, not language they would have used, but like jobs to be done. And so what we did was we carved out like, actually, there's this group over here that talks about these things. And then there's this group that talks about these things, these things are really important. And there's this other group. And for the first time, they realized, oh, these are genuinely 3 different situations that people show up to our front door, so to speak. And so that was a mindset shift for them. And what we helped them do was prioritize one. And it was not hard to convince them at all because it came really obvious. Once we sort of dug in to the 3 different groups, they were like, oh yeah, it's definitely this group over here. We like them. These are the ones we would copy paste or clone or whatever. And so now we're at the point of like, okay, great. So we're focused in on this group of customers. Everybody agrees that this is the customer experience that we want to build. Now comes time to actually like change the customer experience, change the messaging and positioning on your website, change the product onboarding experience, maybe even change some of the post-acquisition, because this is a B2B situation where there are other people that need to get involved downstream. And that's when it starts to get really scary. And they're like, oh, now like we actually need to like, we made all these learnings and that was great and it felt really good, but now we need to actually like put this out into the world. And that can feel really scary. It was, just as much on the website to take that sort of leap of faith as a team and put this new, messaging out into the world, but also for the post-acquisition team to start thinking of themselves as post-acquisition, because they weren't thinking about themselves in that way. So that was another shift for them, that they're like, whoa, we can't remove ourselves from that acquisition process. And we're like, yes, you can, because that's not actually where you're needed. You're needed over here. So there's some, they've operated in this way for 10 years. It's a mindset shift that they need to make. So obviously testing it is going to be needed to make them all feel better about the decision. So again, the research project was just 11 conversations, identifying those jobs to be done, having that like alignment with the team that like, yep, we all agree that this is the customer experience that we want to solve for. These are the customers that we want more of. We're all in agreement there, right? That can't happen in isolation. That can't just be the founder and a hired gun who's done research saying, yeah, that's our plan. Like it has to be something that is internalized, mentally processed, have a couple days to let it marinate and think about like, how does this impact my day to day? And then, okay, how are we actually going to put this out into the world and feel really good about our decision? So that was how that was that conversation. And I absolutely understand why they would want to split test it, and they should, but they're doing it informed. They're doing it backed by a bunch of customer data, right? We got a lot of customer data to back up this hypothesis of this ideal customer. So they can feel really good about that test, but still testing it and continuing to optimize. And they should continue to optimize forever.
I like that you established though, like this, all of this, like really incredible, like operational change comes off the back of just 11 good conversations. And similarly with the team we were talking about earlier, where we've learned within their customer base, there's a more like commodity seeking customer type, and then a more major business investment customer type. Similarly, that came out of 10 customer conversations.
I want to be clear that like, that is the foundational understanding that is needed to make more informed decisions about what to test. And it is not the end all be all. Like we wouldn't encourage you to stop there, like run 10 interviews and you're good and like you're done. It's definitely something that we would encourage teams to do pretty regularly, depending on how often your product is changing, what your release cycles sort of look like. Sometimes we have teams that do it like twice a year. Sometimes it's annually, again, really depending on how quickly the product is changing, how quickly your market is changing. But if you are the type of person that loves running A/B tests, you would probably want to run this type of research at least twice a year, because it will give you so much to test. It's going to keep you busy.
It will and way better results at the end of the day.
Better. Yeah, you want real uplifts in your conversion rate. Definitely do this type of research, because you will be very, very happy with all of the.
You will look so.
You will look so good. Exactly. This is obviously something that we talk about quite a bit and we advocate for quite a bit. And so we have materials. Also, Claire, you mentioned the book. The book is probably the most sort of holistic, like beginning to end look at how to go through this process. There's also another podcast episode that we ran very early on in the first season it's kind of the required rating. So if you're concerned that you're running A/B tests and you're sort of like chasing your tail on this stuff, I would highly recommend checking out the customer blind spots episode, because what we have found with I was going to say a lot of teams, but with the majority, maybe all of the teams that we've worked with, is that the customer that they have been optimizing for is not actually the customer. Like they're not close enough to that customer. They don't understand that customer well enough. And so that customer blind spots episode might be an interesting sort of like wake up call, because there's a few examples of companies that we've worked with that have invested tons of resources, budget in ad campaigns, in doubling down on marketing and content and like A/B testing and all of like just huge lost investment because they were not focused on the right customer.
Right. And we're kind of targeting who they believe to be their customers in this very homogenous way that is not near as effective as knowing the different reasons that people come to your product or the jobs to be done that people hire your product for. Yeah, that was a good call out. All right. See you all next time. And that's it for this episode of the Forget the Funnel podcast. Thanks for tuning in. If you have any questions about the topics we covered, don't hesitate to contact Gia or myself on LinkedIn. And you can also visit our website at forgetthefunnel.com. This is still a new podcast for us, so ratings, reviews, and subscriptions in your podcast platform of choice make a huge difference. See you next time.